A gentleman by the name of Gene Marks wrote a blog for Forbes, and he's a regular contributor for Forbes. And the title of his blog is "If I Were a Poor Black Kid." Now, he's not a poor black kid, he's a middle-aged white guy, and he admits early on in his piece that he was very lucky to grow up the way he did. His kids are very lucky. He obviously has advantages over minorities. His kids have advantages over black kids. This is all stuff that we know. So I'm glad that he at least noted that in the beginning of his piece. However, he goes on to make some arguments that some would call a little ignorant.
All right.
So he's getting a lot of criticism for this, and I just want to read you guys a small part of his blog, and you'll get an idea of where he's coming from. He says, "If I was a poor black kid, I would first and most importantly work to make sure I got the best grades possible. I would make it my #1 priority to be able to read sufficiently. I wouldn't care if I was a student at the worst public middle school in the worst inner city. Even the worst have their best. And the very best students, even at the worst schools, have more opportunities. Getting good grades is the key to having more options. With good grades, you can choose different, better paths. If you do poorly in school, particularly in a lousy school, you're severely limiting the limited opportunities you have." That doesn't sound too crazy, but at the same time, if you are going to the worst middle school in the worst inner city, you are not getting in most cases, you're not getting a decent education. So it's very hard for you to move forward in life. Even if you're given more opportunities, you just don't know as much as you would if you went to a school that actually has decent education.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I'm really split on this issue because on the one hand, I think well, if you were a poor black kid, you wouldn't have grown up with the mentality that you did. I mean, you recognize that, but at the same time, it's kind of a weird exercise, right? On the other hand, I largely agree with him. And if he's giving advice to black kids, white kids, it doesn't really matter, right? If you're in a bad school, if somebody's got to tell you, hey, you know what, you can fight beyond it, right? It ain't easy. It's much, much harder, right? Everybody gets that. Nobody's pretending that it's easy, right? But somebody's got to tell you. And the #1 problem that the kids have is that nobody's telling them, hey, you know what, here are your other possibilities. You can do this and you can do this, and if you get good grades, you can become a doctor, a lawyer, whatever it might be, right? It doesn't matter what the race is. It could be a Latino kid in East LA, it could be a black kid in the Bronx, it could be a white kid in Logan, West Virginia, right? And so I don't disagree with his advice, to be honest with you.
Okay, so that was actually a relatively benign part of his piece. But then he goes on to talk about how black kids should utilize all the technology that's available to them. So he says, look, if you're a black kid, you should use Skype in order to communicate with your other classmates and study with them. Except a lot of poor black kids don't have access to a computer. Now, he says things like, what, just go to a library. But a lot of these students don't have the means, the transportation to even go to a library. So, look, I get what he's saying. You can work really hard and you can overcome obstacles in your life. But he makes it sound like they have all of these opportunities right in front of them. They're just not taking advantage of it. You're just not taking advantage of that computer at home. But you don't have a computer at home.
But, Anna, if they don't have a way of getting to the library, why don't they just take their Bentley? Okay. So now, look, the thing is, this is where Gene jumps the shark.
Right.
So my dad was a really poor kid in southeastern Turkey, and he busted his ass, and he made it anyway. Now, not everybody, had the advice that my dad got from his older brother, et cetera, right, so that he knew which way to go. So it would be one thing to say, hey, Dogan, work really hard, you can do it. It'd be another thing to say, hey, Dogan, if you're having trouble learning, why don't you just jump on your, Mac laptop and Google it. He lives in southeastern Turkey. He doesn't have Macs. Of course, telling black kids to Skype with one another if they don't have computers at home, it's just, come on. Look, I know guys who taught in inner city schools in Washington. They literally can't take the books home. There aren't enough books, let alone Skype.
I love that you bring that up because a lot of these students don't have the ability to take their own textbooks home, especially in inner city schools. So to make the assumption that they have easy access to a computer or the technology necessary to excel in education, I think that that's an ignorant assumption to make.
Yeah, it's kind of like saying, well, if you're having trouble with the nutrition program, why are you even on that? Now, why are you getting food stamps? If you need food, why don't you just go to the Four Seasons?
Yeah, exactly.
There's plenty of food there. They got a great restaurant. I don't get it. So look, I don't want to overly criticize him because I know what he's trying to get at, and I think there's some value in what he's saying, right?
Can I overly criticize him?
Yes, Jayar, jump in, go.
It's an immediate lack of I mean, it's ignorance. And like I said, I've used the term before, and then people always equate that with stupidity. He's not necessarily dumb. What he says would make sense in a normal world. He doesn't know what the world is like for someone that he's describing. He has no fucking clue at all. So the thing is, you may say, oh yeah, you know, I would go on Skype, as we've already pointed out, you know, there's a limited access, stuff like that. But outside of just having limited access and less capabilities of doing things, there is a world that is trying to keep you from getting there. He's putting this template out for what these poor black kids should do to get ahead. Yet at the same time, there is a detailed and well-planned agenda to keep them from getting where they're coming from. People that are established and have the money and the means to do these things, the people that have the Bentleys, are trying to keep them from getting there. Not all of them, but there's a certain amount. We've done several stories on it where poor kids' parents say, you know what, this school sucks. My kid's not gonna get anywhere in it. If you get an A in in some of these bad schools, it doesn't mean anything. They're just getting people by. These teachers don't teach anything. They don't care to. They're not hired to teach. They're hired to be there. So the thing is if you have people, and say you put them in a different school, you have laws that are putting people in prison for putting their kid in a decent school. This is all holding them down. This has nothing to do with, oh, you're just not doing it. There's an effort to keep them from getting places, and that's gonna be at every level. And yeah, you can beat it, but if you're an 8-year-old kid, where is that coming from?
So Jayar's referring to a story where a black mother actually went to a better school district to get her kids a better education. They arrested her for doing fraud to get her kid into that school, which made me sick to my stomach. The downside of this article is that it perpetuates the stereotype.
That poor black kids are just lazy and they're not
Right.
trying hard enough.
Like if you only tried hard enough and you Skyped with your friends, you'd be fine, but you're not trying hard enough.
Right.
Right? So there's huge ups and downs here, and I understand what you're saying, Jayar. Steve.
Yeah, I just want to address that point too, because I was kind of like this, you know, what this article described. My family was extremely poor. We grew up on food stamps. I got free lunch. I had to wait in that line for all the really poor kids that got free lunch. Embarrassing, stigmatizing, all of that. And, you know, I powered through, and the argument that he's making is the argument that I bought into a long time ago. In fact, I used to make those arguments. If you just work hard enough, people can try to keep you down, but they can't keep you down forever. You can always make it. But the reality is that the way the system is set up, only the very, very few can actually do it. This example, for go to a library and use our facilities to do Skype. How many kids can do that, okay? At a local school, let's say in South Central, there's 2,000 kids. You think the library will allow 2,000 black kids who are poor into the library to use their Skype?
Especially
Two
when
or
we're
three
cutting
or four.
funding for those libraries.
Yeah, 2 or 3 or 4 can do it. So it's set up so that a very tiny percentage of the people who work at peak efficiency with all the luck, they make it, and the rest don't. And they can say, see, they made it, why can't you make it? You're a loser, you're lazy. But they're not, it's just the way it's set up. And the flip side is billionaires, okay? There are some billionaires who fuck up and become poor and they're down and out. But it's really, really hard for them. It's hard for them. It's almost impossible. But 1 or 2 may happen to them. It's the same thing. It's really hard to break out of that system of poverty and lack of education. And we need to look for systemic answers and not just say, oh, pull yourself up by the bootstrap, because that does work for a few, but it'll never, ever work for the entire class.